Hello, welcome to the show. My name is Steve Jaguar.
And I'm as co-host Mike Foster.
This is your cloud native video newsletter for your impatient world, curated content about all things cloud native, Kubernetes, acquisitions and funding, and stuff that just makes you go, what?
Yeah, we got a $12 billion acquisition. We have Rancher demo coming for you at the end of the show. We're going to kick it off with OWASP Top 10. Thanks for joining and hope you have a good week. Yes, we have a ton of stuff today. I'm really looking forward to working with Rancher 2.6 at the end of the show. Actually, really good show we have lined up. OWASP Top 10. We have some pretty funny WTFs. Looks like a programmer was screwing around with some Go code and having some fun with some organizations. So we'll check that out. If you're on Twitch, you like what you see, throw us a follow, talk in the chat. We really appreciate it. If you're on YouTube, we always have a bunch of videos that are coming out. So check it 11 a.m. You'll see them pop up on your notifications. So subscribe so you get those alerts. And we appreciate you joining and sharing.
Yeah, I think it's been pretty impressive because we got now almost 30 shows, so like 29 I think this is going to be, and credit to Michael Foster there, my co-host, for chopping them all up and putting all the key segments on there. And so there's a lot of, like, if you don't have time to watch the whole show, you can kind of consume at your leisure, this has been awesome. Mm-hmm. I should do more work to share all that good work.
Oh, it's all good. I actually, I really enjoy cutting it up. And if you're watching and you want to see a specific segment, let me know. Shoot me a message. And we do have an email if you want to message us there. It's just like the name of the show @gmail.com.
There you go. Easy peasy. I just was thinking, is there anything you want to plug? Are you doing a demo that's going to be public, or are you?
Yes. If anybody has time after the show at 12 p.m. Eastern, I'm on Dev Nation doing Kubelinter. So if you've heard us talk about Kubelinter and never seen it, come check it out. Should be a pretty good amount of people showing up. So you can come make fun of me in the chat, talk about the show, and try bonus points if you make me laugh during the demo.
Yes.
What about you,
I
Steve?
won't be there heckling. I know. Yeah, that's cool. No, I don't think I have anything public, but I might next week. Next week, worth knowing if you're watching. We're going to skip a week because we're not going to be doing a show next week. It's my fault because I'm both going on holiday and I will be at a live, that's right, live cloud native conference in London called Blueprint. And I don't know if they're streaming it, but I'm going to talk there about mean time to remediation. And I'm moderating, is that the word, or chairing a panel called Kubernetes, everything you want to know, but we're afraid to ask. And that would be right smack when we would be doing this show. But it's cool. It's got the CTO for VMware. It's got Katie Manji on it. It's got like it's pretty. I'm a little nervous. I'm going to be honest. It's got the who's who on it, so I got to be on guard. I got to be ready.
And you get to ask the controversial questions too.
All the controversial questions. If you've got a controversial question that you want me to ask, then put it below this video in the comments, and I'll pick it up and I'll ask it next week. Woohoo! All right.
Sweet. Should we get into it?
Yeah, let's do it. This is very exciting for me anyway. I kind of used to live in the world of OWASP. I just made you really big. How did I do that? That's no good. There we go. Oh, I've been kicked out. Boom. There we go. I used to be pretty, I don't know what we'd call it, neck deep in OWASP Top 10 in my synopsis days, because we were all about static analysis and we were looking for the OWASP Top 10 in static ways, and plus we had pen testing and all this kind of stuff, right? Mm-hmm. So I was very aware when the 2017 OWASP Top 10 came out. I'm not going to get into the controversy, but there was. But this is cool, and it's a little small. So let's blow this up a little bit so you can see the differences between 2017 and now.
Was just about to make that note, so you're on top of it.
I'm totally on top of it. Is that readable, I think, right?
Yep.
Great. All right. So for me, what was earth-shattering was that I think, and maybe it says it in the section on injection here. I don't think it does, actually. But I think injection's been #1 in the OWASP Top 10 since they made an OWASP Top 10, which is kind of like every 3 or 4 years for, well, let's just say it's the 2000s when they I think it was 2015 or 2005, if I can get this out right. It's always been there, and everybody made jokes like SQL injection is the easiest thing to prevent now. It's almost automatic. How is it still there? But I think injection, for those people who are wondering, it's not just SQL injection, it's command injection, it's remote code execution, it can be JSON, there's a zillion ways to inject code and get it executed. So good to see. Down to number 3, but like a bullet, broken access control went from 5 all the way to number 1, which is, let's just call it misconfigurations, kind of.
Yeah.
And is that a sign of maturity of some sort? What do you think? Or is that the advent of cloud native that has made that happen?
Maybe it's the remote nature of a lot of our work, because access control, I mean, it's relevant to Kubernetes, relevant to cloud, relevant to pretty much everything. Anything multi-tenant now needs some sort of access control. And now it's everything in a container. So everything also needs its own access control. And you have even more layers that you can break now. So it's
exciting.
It's just worked its way into every single product now. So it's, it makes sense. It's a little, how do they define it again?
Let's see what they're calling. They don't really define it. If we go to, let's just go here. Let's go directly to the location description. Right, there we go. Users cannot act outside. That's like RBAC of their intended permissions, least privilege, etc., bypassing access controls,
elevation of privilege, primary keys, metadata manipulation. Yeah, I mean, this is all cloud and Kubernetes sort of things that we talk about, right?
World. Yeah, it was when we were talking about this before we really got into it. We were talking about whether 4 years is even the right cadence for review, because certainly from 2013 to 2017, 2013 didn't seem crazy in 2014 or 15. And then around 16, it started to seem like, this is getting dated. And that kind of worked, because early 2017 and then again late 2017, there were 2 versions, and then it was revamped, and we all kind of went, yeah, I guess so. But I feel like technologically between 17 and 21, giant changes in architecture and transformational stuff it's changed in a way that means this could have had a look in 2019 maybe.
That's possible. I think you remember we had the map about, I think it was CVEs over the last 4 years, and it was almost exponential. It was at least an increasing graph, an increasing trend.
Yep.
And last year we obviously had the most. So I think it's one of the reasons for the big changes. But yeah, I think with the massive adoption of cloud technologies, you probably could make the case for every 2 years now.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Everything's accelerated. So
the other new one, which I really liked, which doesn't fall into the fun hacker vibe, was insecure design. Right there, because now instead of having a great big blob that runs on a big data center server, you've got to design something which could have microservices, could have clouds, could have cloud services, could have managed services, and has access from both internally, externally. It's just the attack surface is now so wildly different that I don't even think insecure design was something they looked at before. But now, in an effort to, I think they even cliche it down here, shift left. They don't say shift, they say move. Doesn't get the bingo card. But that's cool. I like that. That's something that we're saying is pretty serious.
Yeah.
And right below, security misconfiguration. A lot of the things on here that are approaching the top are now going to almost maybe cease to be your typical cross-site scripting injection based CVEs, and are now tipping over into just not understanding how to do what you're doing in a secure way. It's interesting.
Definitely. So check back in 4 years.
Check back in 4 years where we look at this and go, this doesn't apply at all anymore. We've all gone back to servers and monoliths. It's all cyclical. All right. Any other things on that you want to bring up?
No, I think you nailed it. It was pretty interesting. Yeah. I mean, we did our state of security report at StackRox back in and finished one in May, and so it basically said everything that was there. I think it summarized exactly what we're seeing as trends in the industry.
Yeah, that makes sense, and it maps to the results we're seeing now.
Mm-hmm.
So I always get alarmed when I see Corey Quinn's face, but I think that's his intention. He'll never watch this show. We're good. So this is less about migrating from Docker to Podman. Well, maybe it's equal parts Docker to Podman, but also the new Docker desktop subscription model, which I don't think we covered that on a previous show. That could have been a WTF.
Yeah, I think it could have been. Maybe the WTF was in the reaction.
Oh yeah, good point.
But yeah, interesting article. Obviously, you have some highly opinionated people, and I think they kind of, Corey's just kind of outlining Docker's decision there. Docker Desktop requires you to pay them. If you're a large company, Docker Desktop is free for the average user. I think it's up to 5 users. Now you're paying like $5 a month, right? And for background, Docker got bought by Mirantis. So Mirantis, enterprise company, obviously looking at ways to, and to be fair, like you have a whole engineering team supporting this. You need to make some sort of revenue.
Yeah, there's some empathy being had here from Manuel, and some from there. But yeah, but then it just goes into I wonder if I could completely replace Docker with Podman. Thankfully on Mac, right?
Yeah.
And
although, is it on Mac with the M1? Yeah, no, it doesn't work on the M1 chip, I believe, right now, Podman, but the previous ones it does.
Yeah, right. They're saying it does. No, this does not work.
And for reference, anybody who's using a Mac and running Docker or Podman, it will all be virtualized anyways. So it will be run as a daemon, if you're wondering.
Okay.
Or not. Anyways.
So it looks like it's not the hardest thing in the world. It's not like if you look at what they're doing to make it happen, it's like, all right, maybe I'll try it. I don't know.
Yeah, it's very similar. I think one of the biggest differences in Podman is you don't get the same networking suite that Docker has.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. So Podman was kind of built for Kubernetes, and Podman for building containers has Builda, which was created by a couple of Boston engineers. That's why it's called Builda. That was kind of funny.
Yeah.
But yeah, Docker really is containerd with it, and then has a bunch of networking applications attached to it to allow you to network containers. And that's why, Docker run in 2000, I forget when Docker first was released, but when they had, Docker run Nginx and it was just networked and you could go and access a web server locally, like that was massive. And containers were around before Docker. Docker just made it so easy to get into them. So yeah, they do deserve a little bit of credit, right?
Yeah, I think hence the little bit of empathy that went on there. It's like, come on, they've been giving us like the foundation of everything we do for so long. All right, let's give them. If you wouldn't question a subscription model normally, so it's just because it was free. It's whenever anytime somebody turns something that was free into not free, you're like, yeah. Everybody gets up in arms about it.
It's very similar to GitHub's subscription model too, and GitHub is really, really open. So I don't really see an issue if you're a small team trying to work in GitHub. I mean, $5-10 a month, peanuts.
Yeah, I'm not even sure how to pay it. I don't think I use Docker. Obviously, I use Docker Desktop, but I don't. It's weird. Somebody will pay for me. It'll be fine.
Yeah.
All right. Next on the list, more Pegasus.
Yeah. So if you have Apple, go and update because there is a crazy spyware flaw in Apple. As Steve brings it up, you'll see it. But,
I will, except I have to log in.
So NSO group at Israeli spyware company had infected Apple products without a click. So the holy grail of exploits. Basically, a user could send an image to your phone that you wouldn't see, and it would exploit Apple's image processing software in the background and gain root access to your device. So hold on, it wasn't added to stream there for a second. There we go.
There it is.
Yeah.
You caught me just the last minute because it made me log in. I didn't want the world to watch that.
And now it wants to track you.
Yep, track me. So yeah, this is amazing. And actually, this is an article that I After reading it, I went to my wife, who has an Apple product, and I said, "You know how you never upgrade your? You should do that."
Yeah. It was interesting. I brought it up to some of my coworkers, and their thought was, "Does that mean that Apple's image software runs as root?"
Ooh, good question.
It sounds like it,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And that's a big no-no. That's not good. So yeah, if that was probably one of the fixes was, hey, we can't run this as root. And I wonder if it had to do with, do you remember how Apple has been, basically they take a hash of your images on your phone and they upload the hash. And so they run the hash against known bad images on the internet to tell you, to inform people if you basically are up to bad things.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if it has to do with that, because being able to hash and then send out to a remote address, maybe they don't want that in user space because they don't want you to go in and screw around and change the applications that you can't send these things out. Do you know what I mean? I wonder if there's something to do with.
There's no way they're ever going to tell us.
Yeah.
Apple's totally locked down. Even did you read the description? If you look at the phone, you look at the description of the latest update. It just says, this is a security update.
Yeah.
No other details. It's like not even telling you, oh, it's no big deal, or please do it now. It's like normally they have a bit more information, but this is like, this was notoriously devoid of all telling you why it was there.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, Apple's got a pretty closed system. So they obviously found something pretty fundamental that we're never going to find out about unless we get to know people at Apple. We should do that.
Go update your devices.
Update your devices. Definitely. Always update everything. Come on. All right. Next. This was yours. Is this like more learning?
Yeah, this is, it always comes across. So I want to share it with people. It's, it's a free software bundle / PDF bundle that you can get, and you just donate. It's free. So people looking,
72 cents, some weird numbers.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure how it worked like that, or if there's some sort of social engineering going on there with those weird numbers, but yeah, it's a great resource. It came across my desktop from Reddit, so shout out to, I believe it was in Kubernetes Reddit, they posted this, but yeah, great resource, free, download it, tons of options there.
This is huge.
Yeah.
All for yeah, and I guess you can donate this charity information down here as well. So yeah, it looks awesome. Because I don't have enough reading to do.
Yeah. Now let's get into some of the bad stuff.
All right.
Now what starts with the letter C?
Oh my God. Guess where it is?
Shocker of shockers.
This leads very well into the next one. I almost want to jump straight to it, but what did you peruse this and give it a
Yeah, so basically somebody sends you a Microsoft Office document. It looks like a document, but during the startup process for the application, it makes a call out to an external service. You actually will be able to see it if you click and you're paying attention when Word loads. You'll see a little HTTP call out. If you have a security software, it should recognize this. A lot of people don't, though. So that's why it is such a high CVSS score. Obviously, the other reason is it's disguised as a Word document. Most things are an exe file that you mistake and you click it and you download something. This is disguised as something the average everyday person wouldn't think twice about, right?
How does it reach out? Like, what's the vector? Like, what's it?
So
please don't tell me a macro.
From what I understand, it has to do with the way that they change something in the load process of the document. So you can inject like specific loads for the document. I'm not completely sure. Probably not the best expert on this. If anybody has more information, throw it in the chat and correct me, please. But yeah, that's why it's such high score. It is. And the thing is, I don't think it's just for Word documents. I think it's for I think it's for all Office tools.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, it does. Does it say Office? Yeah. Office documents. They probably have the exact same load procedure, right?
Yeah.
And there's somebody obvious. I'm going to guess that somebody discovered that when Office loads, it reports home or something, or it does something, and they went, "Oh, I can make that reach anywhere."
And for those people who are watching that don't know, Apple does the same thing with all its applications when you boot it. Just FYI. Whenever you open an application, Apple knows you open the application.
So expect that vulnerability, except Apple has more of a closed system. It's just a matter of time.
Yeah, it's just a ping.
Yeah.
Still.
Awesome. So that leads us, I'm going to reduce the screen. I'm just going to jump right here.
Yes. It's actually a good segue into the next section too, but pretty funny.
The security update guide. Gee, what day were these released?
Look at all those 0 days.
I got to bump this up just because you can
see
it. There should be call it Microsoft Day. It should be a national holiday or something. It's all the 14th. Is there more? How far does the 14th go?
I will say one of the interesting things, like if you go to the top, you'll see things like Chromium there.
Yeah.
So Internet Explorer uses Chromium now too, right? And Chromium is the underbelly for Chrome. So
yeah,
Microsoft Edge Chromium based. I'm like, is this? There's a little bit more there, but okay, that's one of 50 that we get to write off. We'll give them a little break on.
That's right. This Prince Spoolers, whoever that team is, got a lot to answer for, don't they?
Yeah, they are working overtime right now. Yeah, and this is on the back of their big cloud exploit that we talked about last week too, right? With Jupyter Hub and the databases.
Yeah. This is for all the, every now and then I find myself really complaining about the fact that I have a Mac and how it gets worse sometimes, and it does odd things and it runs stuff that takes up all my CPU. And then I see stuff like this and I go, yeah, no, I'm gonna stick with the Mac, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Mac is notoriously fickle for not letting you configure anything, and there is a reason for it.
Yeah. Very cool. Very cool. All right. The next one is a bit
yeah, I mean, that article kind of made you go WTF, so we'll just get right into the next section.
All right.
Yes.
This was weird. So I didn't even, we struggled even to where to categorize it. And it's a pretty big article, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Well, for a simpleton like me, it is. But it talks about monkey being used unwittingly. That sounds like it's bad, right? But that's because
we forced you to use this package. No,
we forced you. Yeah, we gotcha. It's because, so there's a package here called Dapper, and Dapper uses monkey. So Salesforce uses this, therefore they use monkey. It was like an indirect dependency on a package. Now, why is that weird? Is because the license for monkey, which we could zoom to it, but the quote is here. It says, "I do not give anyone permission to use this tool for any purpose. Don't use it. I'm not interested in changing this license." It's like, okay, that's weird. I guess it doesn't know. Maybe people read okay, if you read the article, there didn't used to be a license at all. And then roughly summarized, and do correct me if I'm wrong, it's a really clever bit of code for Go that people use for testing. So if you want to swap out, normally in C, we used to like stub a function. And so I had to make two libraries. I'd make the library I did, and then I make the library that was a stub that was just used for testing so that I could test modules in isolation, or I make one that returned test data instead of database data, and then we could do testing. He's made one that will do those substitutions on the fly, and he's written it in assembly, essentially, which is super cool. So if you call X, I think the example I have, if you call X gets replaced by Y gets called back to X, and you are none the wiser, which sounds like an attack vector, but super cool. It was just done because he wanted Go to add this functionality because it works in other languages. You didn't expect, well, what essentially happened is Go did not implement the functionality, and everyone started using his joke software.
Yeah.
To the point where there are packages out there that are completely dependent on this. People are really just using it for testing, which is not like it's production, but
yeah,
it's just funny because he's just like, this was not the intent.
Yeah, it was a big screw you to the the Go community in a way.
It kind of was. I feel like it's kind of backfired like totally.
Yeah.
But it's dangerous because he's archived it, so he's not working on it. And I mean, feasibly, he could just go, I'm just going to delete it.
Do you remember the Google tool that we had in, I want to say like 10 episodes ago, that was all about dependency mapping that Google came out with?
Oh, yeah, that was awesome. That dev thing.
Yeah.
We should look this up.
We should have done that with this. We should do that for WTF next week. And just to see where, if this package has weaved its way into anything else that's open source.
Oh, we're definitely
would be very interesting.
In 2 weeks' time, because we're not back next week. But we will have, we will show how many dependencies this is involved in. That is a great idea.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because it would just mess. There is an example in here that talks, I think it's in 2016, somebody deleted a transient dependency, that's what it's called, and blew a bunch of stuff up. And so this is like just another one of those risks where this guy's like, okay.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Fork
Nice
repos, watch your dependencies.
Watch your dependencies. Yeah, for this is a rather edge case of why you would have to do that.
Yeah, very true. Yeah, the licensing is always an interesting issue, right? And you mentioned it last week when we were talking about Copilot. Was, hey, you're pulling code, you have dependencies. Do you even know if you're allowed to use this code, or are you going to find out later? Right?
Yeah. When you get a lawsuit, you're like, what? Why am I getting sued? Oh, thanks Copilot for injecting GPL code.
Yep.
Sweet.
Yeah, there's a lot
All right. Boom.
Another WTF. Yeah. It's kind of crazy. It's like, hey, we use VPN for security and then our passwords get leaked. So we just did the opposite. Yeah. Pretty crazy.
It's, what do you want to call it? Ironic? Is that it?
Yep.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. So what's the advice? Is there advice in here that we're supposed to be following? This is great.
I mean, the biggest thing I would say for a VPN is, one, you have to trust that they're not collecting your data.
Yeah.
Make sure that you have one that says they're not going to, and if they are, that you can sue them. And then 2, use a generated password.
There you go.
Because really, that's the point.
Right.
It's just a redirect, right? So as long as they're not collecting the data and it's not a password that you care about, you should be, it's pretty much all you can do. Everything else is out of your hands, right?
And here was the exactly. And I just thought there must be advice. There it is. Assume the credentials are valid. If you're a server, okay, no, that's pretty obvious. But yeah, force reset all your user passwords. There you go, done.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay, that's just a lot of fun. Yeah, good WTF.
Yeah, I still maintain for VPNs the best option is some sort of username, half a password that you can remember that doesn't change, and then multi-factor authentication on top of that. That way, I actually think changing passwords at a company is useless. I think it results in less secure passwords because people want to remember them. It's best to give them a password that they remember and then add multi-factor on top. You should be good.
Absolutely. Amen to that one.
Mm-hmm.
All right. This is our last WTF. And this only snuck in, well, because we read it.
Yeah. You sent this article to me and I started reading it. And at first I thought they were making a joke because it says number 1, the good, but they don't have a breakdown here.
Yeah. There's nothing there.
It's like
as if there's nothing good.
But then I'm like, oh, okay. So they actually did write the good. On the whole, it's sensible, will help administrators bring their clusters to a reasonable and secure state. And the high level guidance, it's nothing. For those who haven't seen it, the NSA and CISA Kubernetes Security Guide we talked about in previous episodes. It's a lot of the same topics that we've talked about. There are other hardening guides that touch on the exact same stuff. I think the big WTF were the bad stuff.
Yeah, I think everybody agreed. We actually thought it was good. Actually, the demo last week was Kubescape, which automated some of the checks. Yep. We liked that.
Yeah, it was very well done.
This is all fine. Where's the bad? There we go. Oh yeah, they because they mentioned PSPs. They got a real bone to pick about that. But you had opinion on that.
Yeah, so PSPs, there are two things. One, PSPs are just a way to scale your policies in the cluster, effectively using RBAC, right? Really, it's security context. Security context can be applied at the pod and deployment level. PSPs are just a way of automating that check at scale. And there's going to be, I forget the new, we talked about this. What's it called? The new PSP replacement called?
Is it just called pod security or security?
Yeah, pod security controller. I forget.
Yeah.
I don't know. I shouldn't be forgetting this, but yeah, okay, it's being deprecated. They had to talk about it, but the point that they're driving home is it's security context at scale. It's going to be replaced with something else. Who cares? They'll have an update in a year.
Yeah, exactly. It's not officially there yet. So talk about what everyone's using.
Several technologies to fix holes in the PSP model: OPA Gatekeeper, Kyvernal, K-Rail. Yeah, I mean, again, like when it says to fix holes in the PSP model, it's fixing holes in the way we apply the policy in Kubernetes, which is exactly why PSP and Kubernetes fixed it. But that's not an issue of the hardening guide, right? That's an issue in Kubernetes. So it's, I think did you want them to call it out in the guide?
Right. That's what they're doing here. Then they're just like, it's not about speculation. It's a hardening guide.
Exactly. It's not their job to weigh in on what the Kubernetes community is doing with PSPs. And to be honest, there was a serious conversation about if Kubernetes community should just get rid of PSPs and let things like OPA, Kyverno, and K-Trail just manage policies. Like just, hey, we only have security contexts. It's up to you to pull a mission controller or something like that in the cluster to manage policies. But then that doesn't really help anybody, because if you don't, now you have to go learn Gatekeeper to enforce security policies in the cluster. That doesn't make sense. So that's why they came out with the new.
Yeah, I guess there's an argument. You've been more into this than I have, but like you can associate with like a CNI or something. You have to learn how it works if you're gonna.
Yeah, that was exactly it. Are we going to let security policy be decided by an external vendor in Kubernetes? And the security team decided that was not the correct thing. There should be some sort of security policy management in Kubernetes, especially if you're going to scale. Like, you can't be saying Kubernetes scales, but we don't scale security, right? Like,
yeah, it looks bad.
It does. So yeah, anyways, that was my big bow to pick with this. And it was the top thing. And I just thought it's like the easiest one to pick off because PSP is being deprecated. So it's like, hey, this will stick. But another thing too is admission controllers. So mutating admission controllers and validating ones. It popped up in the Microsoft released their threat matrix as, hey, if you have admission controllers, they'll change some of your metadata and data in your deployments, and that could be exploited. I get it. At the same time, if you have the correct control setup, even if I was to go and set up a mutating admission controller to, let's say, change a pod to run as root, it should be caught, right? By a pod security policy or by Gatekeeper or whatever you're using. I need to check exactly what they're talking about, but it just seems like one of those, hey, if this is in the cluster, watch out for it. But really, you can turn it off. Like, it's a feature flag. You can turn off admission controllers, mutating ones especially, right?
Yeah, certainly. That's this. I highlighted the bit that I called out where, like, maybe they meant well, but the example that they put in this article, which I would have thought the NCC group would not do, would be to say, well, if we saw with a privilege flag, we're going to programmatically change the declarative definition, which thus making it not declarative anymore, to add run as user to force it to run as non-root, which will probably break whatever it is you're trying to deploy in the first place, because you're too lazy or you're too hands off to actually enforce that in the development and DevOps community to say you can't do this. That seems lame.
Yeah, and if you think about like the way the community works up to things, admission controllers and especially mutating admission controllers, like those are the last things that you touch in Kubernetes.
Yeah.
Right. So if you don't have like a pod security policy and security context on your deployments, and then you're starting to work on mutating admission controllers, I'd be like,
cart before the horse.
Now, in fairness, they do have a good point, because a lot of applications use mutating admission controllers like Istio to inject data into your application. So I could see a beginner user, hey, I want to install all these applications, and now all of a sudden they have 3 admission controllers in their cluster that they haven't set up RBAC properly for, right? I get it. But anyways, I'm rambling.
Anyway, Yeah, there probably are valid mutating emission controller use cases. It's just when you throw a security window in there like that, get all hot under the collar.
Yeah.
They got into some other issues about sidecars and logging, and I think when it got to what they called the complex, then this was just a bit of NCC peacocking, where they're like, well, it didn't deal with complicated issues in Kubernetes. I'm like, yeah, I know, it's a hardening guide. Here's all this other stuff that could go wrong, like side external dependency, blah, 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 RBAC. All right. Now you're not even talking about the guide anymore.
Yeah. Like audit logs is not hardening. Audit logs is observability, right?
Right. So that's that. So now observers of this show, you know why it's in the WTF section and not in the news section.
Mm-hmm. But informative article.
Yeah. Nevertheless, some good advice in the context of that NSA hardening guideline. So it's still worth a read. Just a little bit wayward in its intent.
Mm-hmm. Now, let's get into the money.
All right. I didn't say anything about this first one because I was like, because you added it in. I thought, all right, you must have a story here because.
Oh, no.
Is that? You just like it?
I just thought it was cool, especially because I believe MailChimp is self-funded.
Really?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that they have just continuously made money, or they've gotten. I'm pretty sure that bootstrap. There you go, privately held bootstrap company. Wow. Did not take any outside funding since 2001. Yeah, MailChimp's been around forever, right?
Oh yeah,
forever is 20 years in the span of IT companies. Yeah, $12 billion, which of course,
they must have a customer base that is freaking insane.
Oh yeah,
that's actually a pretty smart purchase if you can afford it.
Yeah, and it's Intuit too, right? So I think that there's you're going to get to the point where there's some sort of integration in email and sending money, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which makes sense. It's like, not everybody can use Venmo. Oh, hey, grandma, can you send me money? Oh, here's an email. I can just attach money to the email.
Yeah.
Right?
That's it's funny though. Like this brings me back to the day before some people were born who might watch the show. Because MailChimp, I used to use MailChimp on like little websites I did. And then when I had like the Frisbee clothing thing, we used MailChimp for our newsletters in like 2005. And it's like, if you think about what MailChimp started as, it was probably like a Perl script or something super basic that aggregated in the most insecure way you can imagine email addresses and then automatically sent things to them. And then suddenly it built, and then it was a SaaS solution before that even was a thing. And it's just like, I could see I could have written MailChimp in 2001, and now I'd still be writing it. It's just would have got totally out of hand. And why would I need funding? Because it's just you could if you gave me right now, said, Steve, you've got 20 years, write MailChimp, I could do it.
I couldn't, but 20 years is a lot of development time, right? And they've adapted, done a bunch of cool things over the last 20 years. So worth the 12 billion. Congrats to anybody who has stayed on at MailChimp for 20 years. Good for you.
Yeah, if you got a payout on MailChimp.
I hope you're doing well, because that service is used by a ton of people, and you've arguably had a massive amount of influence in the world in a weird way.
Yeah, totally. That's cool. That's a rags to riches probably story for somebody, whoever the person was who started writing the original code.
Probably some person open source. Should probably follow up on that. But
yeah. All right. Should we jump in?
Yeah. This next one's an interesting one for us.
This is a big deal, I think. Did it say 160 million? Maybe not here, but certainly on TechCrunch.
Yeah, Tenable buys Accurix for 160 million. For those who don't know, Accurix open source tool is Terrascan. Actually, I think we should probably demo that at some point. But
yeah, let's do that.
Yeah. What would you say Accurix's tagline is for what they do? It's IAC security scanning.
So I remember their original sort of USP was that they could take perceived misconfigurations or attack service, like evidence of an attack service, and track it all the way back to code and find a best fix location. But I think they were even working on how to do it visually.
Yeah. So what I had seen was it's OPA underneath a hood, like Terrascan, but there's a UI on top, and it's to the point where you can run your Terraform code or infrastructure as code. I'm not sure if it does it for like all infrastructure as code, like Ansible, but definitely does it for Terraform.
Right.
And it will go and say, hey, like you're exposing this port, or this port is open. Are you sure you want to do this? And you can get it to the point where it will open a PR for you. Right.
Yeah.
It will, oh, hey, here's how you should fix this. This port is open. Here's the PR to just fix your code. And then you can just automatically go and accept. So it automatically goes and self-heal the cloud in a way, which is awesome. I think my only thing would be if, one, it can't be a black box, so it has to tell you exactly why it's doing it, and it does. And then two, if you get too many false positives, that could be annoying. But
yeah, you have to manage it.
From what I saw, it was a really thorough product and well done. It was pretty new. This is like an early grab by Tenable, right?
I think so. So my opinion on this, which is all very biased, let's say, because being that I work at Bridgecrew, this is exactly what Bridgecrew does. Like, it's exactly why Palo Alto bought Bridgecrew and why Tenable's buying. It's the same thing. You can auto-create PRs based on misconfigs. That whole loop, it's all what Bridgecrew does. Accurix is kind of a competitor to Bridgecrew. So it's interesting to see them go to Tenable, because Tenable actually is a pretty cool company. Like, Tenable fan for sure. But it's like, oh, okay. It's fascinating that they bought them, though. That's maybe where I was a bit, because they've got great visibility beyond what Accurix I saw ever had onto the front line. Yeah. So if they combine what they've got into what Accurix was working on, into drawing that line, not just from misconfigs, but from an actual attack threat information all the way back to a code fix, as opposed to what a lot of runtime things do is, well, create drift. They'll find things and you fix it on the front, and then you end up with a totally misaligned code representation of what is secure. So if they can solve that, that is a bit of a match made in heaven.
Yeah.
If I can say that about a total competitor.
Yeah, very true. So it's follow log. We'll take a look at Terrascan. Actually, I think since you're so biased, I should probably do Terrascan, and we'll get an unbiased view of that demo, maybe.
Yeah, I'll just make it crash or something.
You could tell me everything I'm doing wrong, and I'll run against the Terraform I use to set up my home server, so it'll tell me how insecure my home server is.
Perfect.
Sweet.
All right, so we jump to this next one.
Yeah, last one before the demo.
All right, so this is Resilient. Resilient's interesting. I think they did very well. Resilient's pretty new. I believe it's another Israeli security startup. What a surprise!
Shocker.
Yeah, 30 million to help security operations and teams automate their busy work. It's not very informative here, so I popped this just so we can. If you've never heard of Resilient, what they're saying they do is, well, vague, I guess. It does feel like they are. I'd spend a little bit of time beyond this, looking at the actual platform name, the blog, trying to figure out, like, you can say things like this, but it doesn't actually tell me what or how that they do what they do. But it does look like they are doing some of the stuff that attack surface versus perceived attack surface. When I read them like maybe a month ago, it looked like they were trying to do what Synopsys was trying to do like 4 years ago. And that was create something that aligned all of the information you had about your insecure environment, be that attack surface versus real attack surface. If I were to say, for example, the combination of an IAST tool with a static analysis tool or a black duck. So static tools are telling you these things could be vulnerable. Real active data tells you it is.
Mhm.
So to align that and to reduce noise, which is actually a conversation we had earlier, how do you, with all, and you know, when you get alert overload and vulnerability overload, how do you sift through all that? I think this is what they're kind of,
Yeah, that's their selling
deal
point.
is.
I mean, you're saying 8 out of 10 patches tend to waste time. Soon it might be 9 out of 10. Each vulnerability takes 6 to 9 hours to investigate. So, you know, being able to narrow it down is really important. It looks like they might be going cloud declarative to say, hey, here's all your services. Here's what you really should focus on. Probably with a little bit of input, right? Because you want to make sure, hey, these are the databases we really care about. Protect those at all costs. I don't really care about my microservices if they're going to get shut down, right? So there's now you're just getting into the time versus risk conversation in security, right?
Yep.
Which we have all the time. What is risk? Yeah. How much are you willing to pay? Right? That's it. It's like buying insurance.
But I think it is. That's what security kind of is. But I would almost put money on them. I'd say being acquired by this time next year.
Pretty quick. If you looked at the people who invested in it, it was like Microsoft, Google, Azure, or Microsoft and Azure, same thing. AWS, yeah.
Well, these companies like to make money, and they know they're going to get a return. So I almost guarantee then, and one of them even might just buy them out. But they look like the kind of thing that would, I don't know, like a CrowdStrike would buy, because they're moving into this space, but they don't have it.
Mm-hmm.
There we go. Fair. There's my call. By this time next year, CrowdStrike or something like it will buy them.
Okay. I'm put your money. Yeah. Are you going to take the under? I'll take 1.2 months. I'll take the over.
Okay, fine. We'll discuss afterwards what we're betting on. How much we're betting.
I'll wear Montreal Canadiens makeup for a show.
Okay, then I have to do Toronto. Yeah,
you're not a Maple Leafs fan, right?
I don't live in Canada anymore, so I'm a fan of every single Canadian team.
Maybe we'll do some sort of soccer team that you don't like, but
no, do Vegas. Forget that. That's not a real hockey team.
All right, so we'll do Vegas. All right, let's get into the tool section. I got a bunch to cover.
All right, it's all yours.
Does everybody know what time it is?
We got a dual tool time for you. Tool time?
It's hard to say. Dual tool.
Tool. Yeah. Dual tool time. There you go. So Kubernetes Instance Calculator. We showed you this last week. I just wanted to give you a quick little breakdown of what's going on. Pretty interesting. I don't think it's as intuitive as it might come out.
Boggled my mind.
Yeah, as it aims to be. So I'm just going to get rid of these to make it easy, because once you get into weird naming, it's kind of hard to sift through. So we have the instance calculator. What it does is it looks at what each cloud provider has in terms of the minimum for the daemon sets and the containers it needs to run on a node. So if you have kubelet, obviously it's going to take up some resources. So there's this minimum memory reserved to the operating system. Let me zoom in a little. You guys can see okay, right? And then, so memory reserved for the kubelet, memory reserved for daemon sets and agents, and then you have what's available to you for your pods. And then there's always a little bit there that Kubernetes reserves to evict if you overuse memory. Now, I know that the memory threshold has changed a little bit in the new Kubernetes, so this may change as well, but it's kind of important to say, like, if you have pod requests and each pod is 100 millicores that it uses, which is about 10 milliseconds of clock in terms of time, that you can only get so many pods on this node. So that's what it's showing here. So if I were to lower the requests, I can see that I can put more pods on. Now, what's interesting is that AWS only allows you to have 58 max pod count on this node. A lot of that has to do with IPs, right? So it has to do with your DNS, and Google only allows 110, and that's because when you get to 220, it basically allows half of the IPs to be used, so that as a pod goes down, another pod comes up, there's an IP available to network that pod.
Yeah, makes sense.
And so it's really useful for A/B deployments, rolling updates, to have half allocated. That's why it's at 110. Now, if we were to go over to something like Azure and we were to click on it, you can see that Azure has different limits.
Okay. Yeah.
So just, I think that's one of the useful things is it'll show you some of the defaults that it's like, hey, let's use the AWS. And then you get into it. You're like, oh, there's this weird limit here. But I'd also question why you want to run 250 pods on a node. Seems unwieldy. Anyways, going back to AWS as our use case, let's pick something that's pretty roomy here. So we got 32 gigabits of memory and 16 vCPUs. The only thing I didn't like is it assumes the same amount of CPU request and memory for all the pods. So if I have, your pods are going to be different, especially if you're scheduling them.
Yeah.
Right, like across your cluster and randomly. So I don't really like that there's this default. So you kind of have to say, okay, well, this is the average workload. Let's just average it out to a pod. And let's say it needs 200 megabits of memory and your CPU, let's say you need 100 millicores as a default. The other thing too is you should be able to type in here. Otherwise it's like, I can't get to 100.
It's frustrating that you can't just type
100.
100.
Yeah. I mean,
like round
OCD's kicking in. Yeah. So if you want to pod limits, let's say we want to get to, you have a gig before you get evicted and CPU will say you're in 500. Now, this is obviously not efficient. The difference between request and limit is way too much to the point where I don't really think you know what's going on in your workload. If your workload is getting to the point where it's taking that much CPU, it might be better just to start up a new pod, right? That's what the autoscaler is for. So we really kind of want to be in this 1.5 range, which is exactly what this is saying for overcommitment. So for CPU, we really want to be in this point where like our requests are what's the word, like 66%, a third of the limits, and the memory it'll say it as well. So like if you're in the memory limits, you kind of want to be in the same sort of range. Now, do I really think this is a catch-all rule? No. And I think memory, especially in a lot of applications, tends to vary wildly, which is why some of the new features got brought out about C groups specifically around memory in Linux. So take that for what it's worth. One of the other interesting things is, as you see, the max pod count went up. By the way, I forgot to mention that. So it's 110 in AWS unless you're on a small node. But also worthwhile that if you click it, it's like, okay, well, it drops because you're only using a very small node. So it's not, you can't just like click and say, hey, this is the most efficient, right? This is like the lowest cost per pod. And then you click on it and you're like, oh, I can only run 17 pods. So there are a lot of factors that play in here. And then, of course, you can increase the amount of daemon sets and agents that you run. So if you're running things like fluentd, some defaults, some logging, that's going to increase the memory reserve for daemon sets and agents. It's pretty good to give you a sort of a baseline of what you're looking at. And
it's definitely helpful.
Yeah.
I think people really struggle with requests and limits.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
nice.
It's one of the, especially, it depends on who's paying the bill, let's say.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of developers are like, oh, well, yeah, I need a gigabit of memory because I just want it to work and I don't really follow all the monitoring and the software that goes into if it's running efficiently, right?
That's pretty funny, actually. Like you've taken, there's the two camps. People that overcook their request limits are the people who don't put anything in there at all. Yeah, exactly. So it's a good exercise. It's interesting to see the price tag that are associated with all these VMs and what you're getting. So worthwhile to, I think the best use case for this is if you have an existing setup and you understand your limits, you understand your requests, and you want to chuck it in here and see what else is out there. Chuck in your average, pod request, pod limits from memory and what you use, and then go and say, okay, like 1, am I really running efficiently? And 2, like, is there a cheaper, like a lot cheaper on the same platform? If I'm running an AWS, is there a better alternative to what we're doing? Right. That's a good point. Yeah. So if you're being really vague, like you complained about the fact that you put requests and limits and it just assumes every single pod is using the same requests and limits, which is not really realistic. However, it does allow you to compare pricing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it kind of, you can tell like the way they coded this, they're not going to go and allow you to have like a drop down of a bunch of different pods. So it makes sense.
Yeah.
It covers the use case, and yeah, useful to get a feel for how it's going to scale too, right? Like if you're going to go small and think like, hey, I need to be efficient. Well, now you need a really good auto scaling policy, because every time you hit that limit, it's just going to boom, here's another node, here's another node. Where, do you need that? If you're going to constantly be at, it might be cheaper to run 4 nodes instead of 16, right?
Yeah.
That are constantly turning on and turning off.
Yeah. But I would say at a glance, in comparison with all the other Kubernetes instance calculators we've seen, which is none, this is the best one.
Very true. Yeah. If anybody has any other suggestions for instance calculators or cost tools, we're all ears.
This is good.
Right.
Hey, I just noticed. Wait! I just noticed something.
Mhm.
Did they spell daemon set wrong on the under 479 meg? No, that's correct. Down below there.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, if you're watching.
Shame.
I will never use this tool.
I always it's any anyways.
Yes,
All right.
I am pedantic.
Let's
go.
You're shallow and pedantic.
Yes.
All right, round 2. And this is going to be part 1 of Rancher, because we're coming up on an hour and there's a lot in Rancher 2.6 that we want to talk about. So I'm just going to start here. Rancher's been around since basically I got into IT 2015, 2016. I believe some of the co-founders worked at Docker before as well. And they kind of made a pivot, I want to say 3 years ago. They had RKE, so they had their own Kubernetes engine, and they had a management platform. And I believe that they were trying to go into their own Kubernetes alternative / service, and XKS / Kubernetes is just open source. So you're not really going to make profit on that unless it's a managed service. So they pivoted towards a management platform. And that's really what their bread and butter is. It's a Kubernetes management platform, really operational focused. So keep that in mind as we go through it. Anything I'm missing here, Steve, that you're thinking about?
Yeah, well, no, I think that's exactly right. I think there's some of their business model is focused more around supporting at scale, because you can use Rancher for free, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it gives you. I'm getting into it, so I don't want to jump the gun here.
Okay.
But,
yeah.
Now, one of the best things about Rancher, and one of the reasons why we used it at my previous company a lot, is it is really easy to get started. You need a Linux host, 4 gigabits of memory, supported version of Docker, and you can just run this command, and you'll have a Docker container. Runs K3s on the host, and then basically you go to the host, it will be networked, and you'll hit the site, and it says, welcome to Rancher. Now, I've obviously signed in and created a password, but this is the homepage. And as you can tell, I like dark theme.
Yeah.
So I automatically picked up on that default. Cool. I like that. It's the small things that matter, Now, you can change where you land when you log in. I don't know if anybody has seen this. 2.6 got a UI overhaul. So if you've seen Rancher before, this will look different. If you haven't seen Rancher before, thoughts on what it looks like? I think it's pretty sleek. You can obviously tell that the way they had it before wasn't really conducive to scaling clusters and managing clusters. So now you can get to the point where, we can go to specific ones. If we have a bunch of them, we can take you to the area let's visit when I left the web page, or I can stay on the home page. Pretty cool. You have your list of clusters. You can go directly into them, check them out. So, as you get to, 10, 20, 100 clusters, now you can sort through them and you can go and look at them cluster by cluster. Now, I don't want to jump to that right away. So this is like if you have your clusters, they'll line up here. Want to just show the user interface before we get into that. Actually, let's start at cluster management. So cluster management, if you want to create a cluster, you have existing ones, you can import them. So like if you have a cluster in Azure, GCP, basically what you're going to do is they have these drivers. I can say, hey, I want to import from GKE, the cluster name. So this is not the cluster name of GKE, this is cluster name that you want to give it in your Rancher user interface. And you need your Google project ID and cloud credentials. And basically what it's going to do is it is going to go to Google and it's going to install a little management container into your cluster. And it's going to access the Kubernetes API. And it's going to pull all the information and then funnel it back into this user interface so that you can get visibility on that cluster and you can manage it. So there's just like a little in between of, hey, I'm going to collect information and I'm going to go there, which is, it's great if you're managing clusters on different platforms, or if you're on-prem and in GCP, you can also set that up. So pretty cool in that sense. If I go back,
Hold on. It just occurred to me that this might be a bit small. Can you make it a teeny bit bigger without it being like corrupting the interface? Great. Yeah.
Interface is pretty adaptive there too.
Good.
Sweet. Yeah. So you can import, you can also create. There is Kubernetes hosted provider, provision new nodes. So you can actually just go and provision VM virtual machine nodes and then use RKE or RKE2 on top, which is interesting.
Yeah, K3 is cool.
Yeah. So if you want to run Rancher Kubernetes engine in the cloud, you can do that directly. You also have custom drivers, which are an option. You can create your own driver if you have a cloud platform. For example, when I used to work at CloudOps, we had one, and we used Terraform and Rancher to create a lot of clusters. It was pretty nice and easy. So again, drivers, there are some that are inactive. You can activate them, and you can add cluster drivers if your cloud platform wants to go that way. Also, for those who are unaware, one of the biggest selling points of Rancher is the ability to configure your clusters in a YAML file. So just like if you have used Terraform before and you want to go and configure using HCL and you go and submit to Google, Terraform up, and it goes and creates a cluster with all of these defaults, you can do the same thing with RKE and RKE2. Which is awesome because you can have a very, very hardened version of a cluster. You can also have a very permissive version. You have two templates. And if somebody comes and says, hey, I want a Kubernetes cluster, and they're a beginner, I can go, okay, here's a easy environment to get started. If it's production, I can have my production templates. So it's like, here is the hardened version. And that's basically what RKE2 is. It's a hardened version of RKE, really sold towards Fed companies. And I think partially because they've been working with Azure, they realized that they needed this default hardened version. So very cool. Pod security policies comes unrestricted and restricted. This is obviously going to change depending on what happens. Normally when you set up a cluster, you're going to say, is it restricted or is it unrestricted? And you can create your own. So these are just like, hey, here's the basic policies, capability policies. And again, you can copy this, expand it. So like whenever you start a cluster, you can give it a default pod security policy profile for the cluster, which is cool. You can also do that in the RKE templates. So as you, oh yeah, and they have the UI to do the template now too. This is pretty sweet.
Ooh.
Well, they want a node template first, but oh, there we go. I want this. So template name. So all your Kubernetes options, if you're going to create an RKE file, advanced options, whether you want the ingress. See, Nginx ingress enabled, but the default backend is disabled.
Yeah, you were talking about that earlier.
Yeah.
Off camera.
Metric server monitoring, pod security policy support, so we can decide if we want to enable this and we want it to be restricted. And then the template that we generate will have that policy built in, which is pretty cool. And there's a bunch of features here. One of the things that I want to check out and I want to do in part 2 is to take a look at this scheduled CIS scan. So we can enable this and we could say, okay, we want it hardened. We want to cron. We want to run it every X amount of time. And we want to keep it for the last 24 hours. Now, I believe this is just kubench under the hood. Pretty sure it is.
It used to be. I assume it's still.
Yeah. So not surprised if that's the way it is. I check out V2 in 2 weeks. When we take a look, maximum worker nodes unavailable. I don't have that at my home server, but yeah, we can set up a worker node policy as well. Authorized endpoint. There's a ton here. I didn't set up anything, but I'm just going to create it. And now we go back. Wait, what just happened? I think I froze there for a second. Yeah. So if I wanted to, I can clone it. I can change it. This is active right now. And then if I wanted to, let's say, create a cluster and custom, I can use these templates. I believe. Oh, I probably have to. I need nodes first, obviously.
Oh.
But yeah,
Do that part.
pick a cloud provider, pick a registry, advanced options. So all the same stuff that we just set up, you would basically just make sure that your nodes are set up, and then you can point it directly at that. Yeah, so that's just cluster management. Because
Wow.
there's a lot here. I mean, one of the things that Rancher did was they have projects, which are an abstraction of namespaces, very similar to what OpenShift does. And you can have group membership into your clusters, which is, I think this is one of the big operational bread and butters of Rancher. Is I can say, hey, you have this user and they have access on these 5 clusters in Azure and AWS, and they have only access to these namespaces across those 5 clusters, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
So I can give you 2 kubeconfig files that have access to those clusters with only specific namespace access in those clusters. Does that make sense? And one of the cool things, this is like default admin. I don't want to show you the actual credentials because I don't really have a cluster. This would just be local anyways. But your users and your groups you can set up here, and then your users, it'll generate a kubeconfig file for whatever access you detail, and then I could just forward it, or I could give it to a developer and say, hey, here's your cloud config. And then it will only have access to certain clusters that you've set up through here. And there's a ton here. I mean, you can get lost. Additional rules, configure feature flags. Some of these are at the Rancher level, so the user interface, what you have access to, and then other ones are at the cluster level.
Right. Is that confusing?
It's another layer. Yeah.
Okay.
For sure. And you can see there's some defaults in here too. It's not any different, I think, from if you were using AWS and you had IAM and you had, AWS resources, and then you had Kubernetes resources, right? It's like you have Rancher resources, then you have Kubernetes resources. Yeah, but there is a reason why big companies, there are IAM specific teams, right? It's a beast. But yeah, I like the beginning. You have what's new, docs, forums, Slack, file and issue, commercial support. There are some global settings. So feature flags you can turn off. You can turn off fleet. You turn off Istio service. I can turn off RKE too, and it'll just default to RKE 1.
Oh, right, of course.
Yeah, because this is technically in tech preview. And you can change some of the coloring.
Yes.
It's
custom
big
logo.
stuff. There's a lot more here that I'm missing, but
I can't
again,
believe you didn't upload our logo as a custom logo.
I should have. Yeah, I really should have. Yeah, one of the other cool things is it uses Fleet, so we can create a Git repo.
Oh yeah, yep.
Yeah, and then pull directly from that. So obviously you have your CD tool as well.
Sweet.
Thoughts? Opinions? Things that we missed, that I missed.
So it's appropriate to say now, I was not a huge fan of the interface before for Rancher. And I think I do like this one a lot better. Maybe just because you put it in dark mode. But it felt more intuitive. Like I was following you go through going, okay, this is cool. And the way it could handle multi-cloud, like that's we've been saying the word maturity a lot more. And this is good. This seems to be stepping. Is this a SUSE influence, you think? Like it just seems to be stepping towards the world of the big players now.
Yeah.
Like I don't know if I'm gonna say probably, but I'm guessing the OpenShift world, looks at this, is looking at this going, crap. This is pretty good.
Yeah.
Well, seeing as we talked about our competitors, let's talk about yours now.
Yeah, we've had Rancher pop up in a few conversations. The biggest difference, especially coming from ACS, is Rancher is an operational tool, right? So they've added some security things, and they've hardened their RKE, but really at the end of the day, it's managing clusters. And the question that I would have is if you're going all in on something like Azure, like what do you need Rancher for?
Right.
If you're
right.
Like
Totally.
Unless you're doing hybrid platforms or you're doing that, then you could use Rancher. But then again, like you're in the same issue of, well, you're managing your Kubernetes clusters across 2 platforms, but how are you managing all the other services? Are you using VMs? If you're in GCP and AWS, do you use IAM for AWS and then GCP specific rules for all your other services? Like there's I think one of the reasons why SUSE bought them, obviously, is because SUSE wants to do something similar to OpenShift, which is, hey, you have your on-prem stuff. Here's Rancher to consolidate it all. The problem, again, that you run in is it's not the same Kubernetes version. So now you have multiple different Kubernetes versions. You have multiple different dependencies across clouds. But I will say, in terms of startup, getting going, that's Rancher's bread and butter, is the usability, the ease at which you can get a Kubernetes cluster installed. So like I use Rancher on my home server quite often because it's so fast. As they go more secure, they lose some of those features too, right? So as you get rid of the Nginx default backend, as you get a hardened version, as you get less permissive Nginx policies or pod security policies, you just become more enterprise now.
Yeah, but still solving a huge problem. Like,
oh yeah, for sure.
You're talking about multi-cloud. Like so many of the places that I've like through my vendor-based career walked into, and they drop, this is what we're doing, and you're like, okay, you have all cloud. You have every single cloud somewhere here. How are you managing that? Oh, we're not largely. All right. Okay. So some Rancher just falls smack onto that. And I would imagine the sales team and technical team for SUSE, when they saw what we could take Rancher in this direction to solve this problem that we encounter, it's just like, yeah, this is perfect.
Yeah. And operationally, I think they probably get a lot of wins in the 100 to 1,000 person companies.
Yeah.
I think that's where they get their most wins. Maybe some big enterprises, if it's just like a small subset of the enterprise. But
okay. Where it's, once you get past that many employees, you become like a multi-company company.
Yeah.
Anyway,
and I think they're more European market too. Obviously.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah, that's interesting. It's funny. I would have previously characterized Rancher as being the 0 to 100 companies. So it's kind of cool that that's where it's elevated itself to, and it looks like it. So that's good.
And now that it's SUSE Rancher, I thought that was kind of funny. It's technically like it's Rancher, but then it's SUSE Rancher when they talk about it, and because they're trying to somewhat make it so you're not just looking at Rancher, but you're looking at SUSE's portfolio too. So
I see. So
you're looking at operating system with, because SUSE also has like a minimized container optimized operating system. So then it's like, hey, you got operating system, you got a COS, and you have Rancher. You know, you can craft a broader story that way about what you can secure and what you can enable.
Okay, I can see that. Makes sense. Right. You know, the final thing I need is somebody to come here for me and assemble my Rancher cow.
Oh,
did you get one of these at KubeCon last year or something?
No, I wish.
This is what it looks like.
Send it to me. I'll assemble it and I'll send it back to you.
Right. Done. Promised.
Now they have the weird like cow chameleon thing. Have you seen that?
Yeah, I have seen that. Yeah. That's cool. I didn't know what I was getting into when I ordered that. When I signed up for the merch for Rancher, and they sent me this. The photo of it assembled looks amazing. Mm-hmm. But you're like, you wouldn't have thought a thing that's this big has like 250 pieces. I don't got time for that.
Yeah, I don't have the thumbs for that either. Those pieces are tiny.
I know. I've got to get some kind of a sweatshop going, try and put that together for me.
Yeah, that's why I was saying, send it to me. You know, I'm the organized labor over here.
All right.
It's fine. All right. Speaking of which, we have next week off. So Steve will take a shot at those Legos next week and hopefully come back for Rancher Part 2 demo in 2 weeks. Rancher Part 2 demo, I'm going to set up my home server. We're going to have a cluster there. I'll have a cluster in GCP. And if I feel like spending money, I'll have a cluster in Azure and AWS too. But yeah, we're going to network it all, set up some pod security policies, probably have a bunch of Weave sock shop setups. Yeah. You guys can go ping and try to break. So yeah, check it out in 2 weeks.
All right. That sounds amazing. I good luck with all that.
Yeah, I don't know why I'm signing myself up for this stuff, but it's going to be fun.
It's on the internet now. It's forever.
Yeah.
All right. Forever. I'm excited to see that. And I think that's the end of our show.
That is the end of the show. If you liked it, check us out on YouTube again. Subscribe. Love it if you share. Otherwise, we'll see you in 2 weeks and have a good weekend. I'm Mike Foster.
I'm Steve Jaguar.
Take care.